be seen by the public. It could be seen also by the public in Egypt, because this Rosetta Stone is the icon of our Egyptian identity.
The Rosetta Stone is one of the world's most famous artifacts, a black slab covered in 3 scripts that unlocked the secrets of ancient Egypt. Most people see it as a triumph of discovery.
What's inside there, and he was the one, Zahi supposedly discovered it, but he's discovered everything. Yeah, well, that was one of the reasons why Zahi came on.
But Zahi Hawass, Egypt's most outspoken archaeologist, says, "We've missed the real story." To him, the stone isn't just about language. It's about power, control, and something far more unsettling. "I will tell you what it really means," he warns. The stone that gave Egypt back its voice. Picture Egypt at the turn of the 19th century, not the Egypt of postcards and travel brochures, but a land caught between ancient mystery and modern conquest. The desert stretched endlessly, hiding treasures beneath its sands, while European empires raced to seize both land and legacy. It was during this frenzy that a group of French soldiers stumbled on what would become the most important archaeological discovery in history: a black basalt slab, chipped and scarred, inscribed with strange, crowded lines of text. This was 1799. Napoleon's army deep in its Egyptian campaign. Soldiers digging near the town of Rosetta, modern-day Rashid, unearthed the slab while fortifying a military outpost. They didn't know it at the time, but they had just uncovered the key to unlocking a civilization that had been silent for nearly 1,500 years. Without this chance find, the voices of the pharaohs might still be mute to us. At first glance, the stone didn't look like much. About 4 feet tall, with a broken corner and scratches across its surface, it seemed almost ordinary. But the inscriptions told another story. 3 distinct scripts ran across the slab: Greek at the bottom, Demotic, the everyday Egyptian script, in the middle, and hieroglyphs at the top. For centuries, scholars had been staring at hieroglyphs carved into temple walls and papyrus fragments, baffled by their meaning. Were they letters, symbols, magical signs? Entire books had been written about them, most of which got it wrong. But here, on this one slab, was a side-by-side translation. 3 languages, 1 message. It was as though the past had left us a dictionary. Of course, the soldiers weren't linguists. They saw a rock with markings. But word of the discovery spread fast. Napoleon, obsessed with outshining the British, filled his campaign with scholars, savants they were called, tasked with documenting Egypt's wonders. They immediately understood the stone's significance. This wasn't just another artifact to cart back to Paris. It was a key, and keys unlock doors. Soon, the Rosetta Stone became a prize of war. When the French were defeated by the British in 1801, the slab was handed over under the terms of surrender. Packed onto a ship and carried to London, it was installed in the British Museum, where it still stands today. For the French, the loss was bitter. For the British, it was triumph. But for the world, it was something far greater. The first step toward hearing the voices of ancient Egypt once more. Imagine being a scholar in the early 1800s, standing before the stone for the first time. You see the neat, familiar lines of Greek. You can read those. The Demotic script is trickier, but some progress has been made. And then your eyes climb to the hieroglyphs. Birds, eyes, snakes, abstract shapes, all arranged in mysterious order. For centuries, these images had defied explanation. They looked like pictures, but they weren't just art. They were writing, and yet no one knew how. Now, here they sat, on the same stone as the Greek text. Surely, if one could be read, the others could be deciphered. That realization sparked a race. Scholars across Europe devoted themselves to cracking the code, driven by both curiosity and national pride. Who would be the first to resurrect a dead language? Who would peel back the silence of Egypt's temples and tombs? It was a challenge that consumed lifetimes, demanded obsession, and sometimes even ruined reputations. The Rosetta Stone was no longer just an artifact. It was a battleground of intellect. But before anyone could break its mysteries, the stone itself became an icon. Crowds flocked to the British Museum to see it. People stared at its dense carvings, wondering if they were in the presence of something supernatural. Could this rock really hold the secret to pyramids, mummies, and gods? Could it make the pharaohs speak again? The very idea seemed both thrilling and unsettling. Because here's the thing, the Rosetta Stone didn't just represent knowledge, it represented power. Whoever could unlock it would control the narrative of Egypt's past. For centuries, Egypt had been reduced to biblical stories and travelers' tales. Suddenly, this stone offered a way to hear Egypt on its own terms, and that, perhaps, was the most revolutionary part of all. The stone sat there, silent but commanding, a puzzle daring to be solved. Every line on its surface carried the weight of history, waiting for the right eyes and the right mind to untangle them. It's easy to forget now, when hieroglyphs decorate museum walls and coffee mugs, that for centuries they were an impenetrable code. To stand before the Rosetta Stone in those early years must have felt like standing before a locked vault, knowing unimaginable treasures lay inside. The soldiers who dug it up couldn't have imagined the storm it would unleash. The scholars who gazed at it couldn't have predicted the obsession it would inspire. And the world that waited on the other side of its decipherment, the Egypt that would emerge from silence, was far stranger and more complex than anyone expected. But that's the thing about keys. Once you turn them, you can never go back. The stone had given the world a key, but who would be clever enough, determined enough, to actually turn it and unlock the voices of ancient Egypt? Cracking the code, the men who unlocked the past. Once the Rosetta Stone was on display, the real battle began not with swords or cannons, but with ink, parchment, and sleepless nights. To look at its inscriptions was to stare into a locked chamber of the human story. Everyone knew the Greek text could be read, but the hieroglyphs, those silent birds, serpents, and strange abstract shapes, remained an unbroken code. Whoever could solve it would not only claim a personal victory, but also seize the glory of giving ancient Egypt back its voice. Two men soon stood at the center of this intellectual contest: Thomas Young of England and Jean-François Champollion of France. Their duel was less about who had the sharper mind and more about who had the endurance to wrestle with a puzzle that had defied centuries. Both were brilliant. Both were stubborn. Both knew the Rosetta Stone would make or break them. Thomas Young was the kind of genius who seemed to dabble in everything: physics, medicine, mathematics, even the wave theory of light. When he turned his attention to the stone, he saw it not as a mystical object, but as a problem of pattern recognition. By comparing the Greek and Demotic texts, Young identified names, titles, and repeated phrases. Slowly, he began matching Demotic symbols with their Greek equivalents. It was progress, but the hieroglyphs still loomed like a wall of shadows. Champollion, on the other hand, approached the problem like a man possessed. Born in France, he had been obsessed with ancient languages since childhood. By his teenage years, he could read Coptic, the language of Egypt's Christian minority, itself a descendant of ancient Egyptian. To Champollion, Coptic wasn't just a language, it was a lifeline. He believed it was the missing thread that could tie modern knowledge back to the hieroglyphs carved in stone. The rivalry between Young and Champollion became legendary. Young made critical early breakthroughs, but he often treated the hieroglyphs as decorative symbolic shorthand rather than a true written language. Champollion disagreed violently. He was convinced the hieroglyphs weren't just pictures, they carried phonetic sounds, like letters. That difference in perspective would change everything. In 1822, Champollion finally had his breakthrough moment. After years of cross-checking the Rosetta Stone with other inscriptions, after sleepless nights poring over symbols and sounds, he leapt up from his desk one September morning, ran to his brother and shouted, "I've got it!" Then, according to legend, he collapsed on the floor in exhaustion. What he had realized was breathtaking. Hieroglyphs combined sound and symbol. They weren't static images. They were alive with meaning. By decoding them phonetically, Champollion could suddenly hear the words of the pharaohs. Think about what that meant. For over 1,000 years, the temples and tombs of Egypt had been mute, their inscriptions no more than decoration to outsiders. Suddenly, the walls were speaking. Names of gods, hymns of praise, records of kings, all of it came pouring out, as if Egypt itself had been waiting for the right listener. The achievement was so monumental that it transformed not just Egyptology, but archaeology itself. No longer were scholars guessing at meanings or relying on ancient Greek historians for second-hand accounts. They could now read Egypt's story in its own voice, and that voice was powerful, strange, and unsettling. But the path wasn't smooth. Young felt overshadowed, believing Champollion had built on his groundwork without proper credit. National pride flared. England versus France, empire versus empire. Each side wanted the glory of claiming the pharaohs. Yet history ultimately favored Champollion, the man who truly unlocked the hieroglyphic code. His name became forever tied to the Rosetta Stone, his discovery immortalized as one of the greatest intellectual triumphs in history. Still, what's fascinating isn't just the rivalry or the brilliance, it's the emotional weight of the moment. Imagine the sensation of reading hieroglyphs aloud for the first time in over a millennium. Imagine realizing you were the first person since the fall of Rome to understand what the ancient Egyptians themselves had written. It wasn't just scholarship, it was resurrection. The Rosetta Stone had done more than provide a translation. It had opened a door to an entire civilization's inner life. And with every line that Champollion deciphered, Egypt's silence crumbled. The gods spoke again. The pharaohs were remembered. The stories that had seemed buried forever emerged with startling clarity. Yet this triumph also carried unease. If hieroglyphs were both sound and symbol, then they weren't just words. They were a world view, a sacred language that blurred the line between communication and magic. To read them was to trespass into a system of thought meant for priests and kings. Scholars had gained access, but at what cost? The Rosetta Stone hadn't just unlocked a language, it had shifted the balance of history. The past could now speak for itself, but that voice might reveal more than the world was ready to hear.
You probably know that the Rosetta Stone helped us to decipher ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, but the Rosetta Stone is a modern name. The ancient Egyptians, of course, would not have called it like this. They would probably have just called it a decree.
But if unlocking the hieroglyphs gave us back Egypt's voice, who gets to decide what that voice really says, and who has the right to guard it? Zahi Hawass and the Guardians of Egyptian Memory. If there is one name modern Egypt has etched into its story alongside the pharaohs, it's Zahi Hawass. With his trademark wide-brimmed hat and booming presence, he's as much a character as he is an archaeologist. To some, he's Egypt's fiercest defender. To others, a showman who knows the power of a headline. But no one disputes this. Zahi Hawass has made himself inseparable from the fight to control Egypt's past. When he walks through excavation sites or into a press conference, it feels less like an academic at work and more like a general inspecting his troops. He doesn't simply dig for artifacts, he defends them with fiery speeches.
Zahi Hawass is the leading Egyptian archaeologist, Egyptologist. He's world famous. He's devoted his entire life.
And demands for their return when they sit in museums abroad. For Hawass, the Rosetta Stone is more than a historic artifact. It's a wound. For 2 centuries, the stone has rested in the British Museum, drawing millions of visitors who marvel at its inscriptions. To Westerners, it's an object of triumph, the key to unlocking hieroglyphs. To Hawass, it is stolen treasure plucked from Egypt during a time of foreign occupation. He argues with the intensity of someone defending family honor. It belongs to Egypt, not behind glass in London. This stance has made him a controversial figure. Critics accuse him of mixing nationalism with scholarship, but that's exactly the point. Hawass doesn't separate the two because, in his mind, Egypt's past is not just history, it's identity. Without the artifacts, without the voices of the past, what's left of Egypt's story? To let them remain scattered across the world feels, to him, like allowing strangers to rewrite his people's memories. And this is where the Rosetta Stone becomes something far more than just a linguistic key. To Hawass, it symbolizes power. Who holds it, who interprets it, and who controls the narrative that follows. If Egypt does not own the Rosetta Stone, then it doesn't fully own its own history. And that, he argues, is terrifying. The debate Hawass stirs isn't just about ownership, it's about authority over meaning. If the Rosetta Stone is the key to unlocking hieroglyphs, then whoever holds it or claims its meaning wields enormous influence. Museums, universities, and historians in the West have long framed Egypt's story. Hawass is challenging that dominance, saying, "This story belongs to Egyptians first." His battle has sparked international attention. Journalists chase his sound bites, while his enemies accuse him of theatrics. Yet, in the midst of the drama, his message strikes a chord. History is not just about the past, it's about pride, ownership, and the ability to say, "This is ours." Think about it. When visitors shuffle past the Rosetta Stone in London, they are standing in front of a monument to cultural conquest. It's not just a relic of the pharaohs, but also a trophy of empire, claimed during Napoleon's campaigns and eventually seized by the British. For Hawass, every photograph snapped in that gallery is a reminder of Egypt's loss. And so he fights. He writes letters, launches campaigns, and raises his voice wherever it will carry. He insists that the Rosetta Stone must be returned, not just because it belongs in Egypt's soil, but because of what it represents. To him, the stone is proof that Egypt's story can be silenced, stolen, and displayed under another's flag. And that silence, he says, is more dangerous than any curse. But there's another layer here, one that makes Hawass's warning sound less like political rhetoric and more like prophecy. If the Rosetta Stone is not just about words, but about control, then we have to ask, what does it really say? What meanings lie in its inscriptions beyond the celebrated translation key? Could there be messages we've overlooked? Messages that shift not just how we see Egypt, but how we see power itself? This is where Hawass becomes less the archaeologist and more the storyteller, teasing darker implications. His critics may roll their eyes, but he knows the weight of a warning. By telling the world, "I will show you what the Rosetta Stone really means," he forces us to question whether history as we know it is the whole story, or a version filtered through whoever controls the stone. In his view, the fight is not over. The Rosetta Stone may sit behind protective glass, but its meaning is still alive, still contested. And if he is right, the true message carved into that basalt surface is not only about unlocking hieroglyphs, but about unlocking something unsettling, the way knowledge itself can be used to dominate or to free. If the Rosetta Stone is more than a key, if it carries a message about power and control, then what is that message? And why does Hawass insist it's terrifying? The stone's darker meaning: power, control, and secrets in plain sight. For most of us, the Rosetta Stone is a museum piece, something to admire behind glass before moving on to the mummies and golden masks. But when Zahi Hawass warns that its true meaning is terrifying, he's not talking about hieroglyphs or translations. He's pointing at something deeper, what the stone represents about who controls knowledge, and how that control has always shaped the fate of civilizations. Let's look at what the stone actually says. On its surface, it's a decree from 196 BC, praising Ptolemy V, a Greek ruler who sat on Egypt's throne after Alexander the Great's conquest. The text, written in 3 scripts, hieroglyphic, demotic, and Greek, was not a love letter to history but a political stunt. It declared the young king's generosity to temples and priests, showering him with divine legitimacy. In other words, the Rosetta Stone wasn't a neutral record, it was propaganda, carved in stone. And here's where it gets unsettling. For centuries, the stone was celebrated because it cracked the hieroglyphic code. But the content itself? It's a reminder that history has always been written and carved by those in power. The stone tells us less about the will of the Egyptian people and more about how a foreign ruler wanted to be remembered. Its message is control, dressed up as devotion. Hawass seizes on this idea. To him, the Rosetta Stone doesn't just represent stolen treasure. It represents stolen voices. Imagine this: the very artifact that allowed modern scholars to hear ancient Egypt again is itself a tool of political manipulation. The irony is chilling. The stone is both a key to truth and proof of how easily truth can be twisted. Think about how knowledge works today. Whoever controls the data, the narrative, the story, controls perception. The Rosetta Stone was an ancient version of this. By writing the decree in 3 scripts, the Ptolemaic rulers ensured that priests, officials, and everyday readers across Egypt would see the same message of royal divinity. It was mass communication, designed not to enlighten, but to unify obedience. In Hawass's words, that's the terrifying part. We celebrate the stone as a bridge to the past, but the past it's showing us may already be filtered propaganda. This isn't just abstract theory. The history of Egypt itself shows how knowledge was used as a weapon. Pharaohs erased the names of rivals from monuments, literally cutting them out of memory. Others claimed victories in battles they barely survived. The Rosetta Stone sits in this tradition, a monument to how rulers use words to bend reality. And the fact that we needed this piece of propaganda to rediscover an entire language, that should make us uneasy. It's as if the Rosetta Stone is whispering a warning. Beware the stories carved in stone, because they may not be the truth at all. They may be the version of truth the powerful want you to believe. This is where Hawass's warning hits hardest. When he says, "I will tell you what the Rosetta Stone really means," he isn't only talking about Egypt. He's pointing to a universal truth. History is fragile. Narratives can be stolen, rewritten, and displayed in museums far from their source. The Rosetta Stone is both proof of Egypt's brilliance and proof of how easily that brilliance can be appropriated. Imagine standing in front of it in London. Tourists shuffle by, snapping photos, marveling at the ancient script. Yet few stop to wonder, whose voice am I hearing? Is this Egypt speaking or Ptolemy? Or perhaps the British Empire, which took the stone as a spoil of war and has displayed it ever since? Hawass sees all of this when he looks at the basalt slab. He sees Egypt's voice, yes, but also its silence, imposed by foreign rule and foreign possession. And he wants us to feel the weight of that silence, to understand that the true terror of the Rosetta Stone is not a hidden curse or a mystical message, but the reminder that whoever controls the stone controls the story. And maybe that's why his words land like a warning. We may think of archaeology as dusty and safe, locked in the past. But the Rosetta Stone shows us how alive the struggle over history really is. It's not just about uncovering what was written, it's about asking who wanted it written and why. That's the uncomfortable truth Hawass pushes us to face. History isn't always what happened. It's what survived. And often, what survived was designed to keep someone in power. If the Rosetta Stone reveals how power can twist truth, then what happens when writing itself, those sacred Egyptian scripts, becomes something more than communication? Could unlocking them also mean opening a door to knowledge the ancients never meant for everyone to possess? Between sacred script and dangerous knowledge. For the ancient Egyptians, writing wasn't just a tool, it was sacred. Each symbol, each curve of a hieroglyph carried not only meaning, but power. To carve words into stone was to bind them with eternity. To speak them aloud was to give them life. This is why hieroglyphs weren't treated as mere letters. They were seen as living forces, dangerous if mishandled, holy if respected. Now pause for a moment and think about that. For us, writing is second nature. We text, we type, we scribble notes on scraps of paper. But to an Egyptian priest, words were alive. The script itself was a bridge to the gods, to magic, to secrets meant only for the initiated. Not everyone was allowed to read or write. Knowledge was guarded, controlled, and carefully passed down, because it was believed that language could change reality. This is where the Rosetta Stone story gets even stranger. By cracking the hieroglyphs, scholars didn't just resurrect a lost language, they unlocked a body of knowledge that had once been considered too dangerous for common hands. Rituals, prayers, spells, myths, curses, all of it came flooding back into human awareness after centuries of silence. What the Egyptians had reserved for their priests, we now flip through in translated books. The sacred has become public, and with it comes an unsettling question. What have we unearthed that we don't fully understand? Consider the pyramid texts, some of the oldest religious writings in the world. They weren't written to be read by casual eyes. They were inscribed inside tombs, hidden away, meant to guide the dead pharaoh on his journey to the afterlife. Unlocking those texts through the Rosetta Stone gave us insight. Yes, but in the eyes of the ancients, it also meant trespassing into realms meant for the divine. Hawass himself has hinted that this is where the true terror lies, not in curses written on tomb walls, but in the arrogance of thinking we can handle knowledge never meant for us. It's almost ironic. The Rosetta Stone has become a symbol of human triumph over mystery.
No one in the modern age had a clue about how Egyptian writing worked. The most popular idea was that they were purely ideographic, with each drawing representing a concept.
Yet, the Egyptians might have seen it as a symbol of hubris. They understood that knowledge and power walk hand in hand, and that too much of either in the wrong hands leads to chaos. To read hieroglyphs was to step into the world of gods and spirits. And we've thrown that door wide open. Take the Book of the Dead. Its name alone makes it sound like something out of a horror movie, but it was really a collection of spells, chants, and instructions meant to guide the soul through the perilous trials of the afterlife. Once indecipherable, now it's been translated and analyzed to exhaustion. But do we really understand it? Or are we simply peering into a spiritual system we can describe but never truly grasp? The danger, Hawass warns, is that by treating these writings as academic puzzles, we strip them of their sacred weight and perhaps of the warnings built into them. And that's where the Rosetta Stone sits, right at the edge of awe and dread. It gave us access to a world of thought, belief, and ritual that had been silent for centuries. But it also broke the seal on knowledge that may have been intentionally guarded. Imagine if someone today uncovered a manual filled with secrets for manipulating forces we don't fully understand. Would we study it with caution or rush to publish it? The Rosetta Stone reminds us that we already made that choice. Of course, many scholars scoff at the idea that ancient scripts could hold dangerous knowledge. To them, these are cultural artifacts, nothing more. But history is full of warnings about underestimating the power of words. Think of how religious texts have shaped nations, sparked wars, and toppled empires. If modern language can hold that kind of sway, why should ancient language be any different? And so, the Rosetta Stone becomes more than a museum piece. It's a reminder of the thin line between sacred knowledge and reckless curiosity. We unlocked the hieroglyphs, yes, but at what cost? Were we meant to peer into texts designed only for the chosen few? And if those texts carry not just history but power, what does that mean for us now, centuries later, when their words echo in translation, but their spiritual weight remains largely mysterious? Hawass leaves that question dangling in the air like a shadow. He knows that the stone isn't cursed, not in the Hollywood sense. Its terror lies in something quieter, more profound. The realization that knowledge is never neutral. It can uplift or destroy, depending on who holds it, and the Rosetta Stone has shown us both sides of that truth. The terrifying mirror of the Rosetta Stone. If the Rosetta Stone taught us anything, it's that words aren't passive, they're power. For the Egyptians, hieroglyphs were sacred tools, locked away from the uninitiated, because they could shape belief, identity, even reality itself. And yet here we are, centuries later, staring through the glass at the very slab that pried those secrets wide open. The unsettling part isn't just that we can now read what was once forbidden, it's that in translating the script, we've also translated its dangers. Propaganda carved in stone still whispers its message of control. Sacred prayers still pulse with echoes of their ancient magic. What was once holy is now dissected, studied, and consumed by millions, without any guarantee we truly understand what we've awakened. Zahi Hawass pushes us to see the stone not as a triumph of scholarship, but as a mirror. When we look at it, we don't just glimpse the Egyptians of 2,000 years ago, we glimpse ourselves. Our hunger for knowledge, our obsession with control, our willingness to strip the sacred into something ordinary. And that, he warns, is where the terror lies. Because the Rosetta Stone doesn't just tell us about Egypt's past, it tells us about our present and our future. The question isn't whether we've unlocked the language of the pharaohs. The question is, what truths about ourselves have we unlocked in the process? Your comments are welcome down below. We'd love to hear from you, too. For more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.